I don't think the terms of what we're, because sometimes when we use words, we mean different things by them, no? And I don't want to go into this binary of rationality, irrationality, as if irrational means, being driven perhaps by forces that are psychic, emotional, not necessarily. If we mean it by that terms, or we mean it something like, something that doesn't, serve your own self-interest, but you do it anyways. I think it really depends on which gaze or lens that you will place as you try and understand this thing that is called Israel, no? And who, in this particular historic moment, is using some of its own historical, if you want, legacies and continuous legacies of expansion and replacement and destruction and militarism, all together, to create this form of genocide that is unfolding in front of our eyes. What I do agree with, I mean, there is a goal here. The goal here is the destruction of the Palestinian people, and starting with the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Of course, it will not stop there. Will continue long after, even if Israel succeeds in destroying Gaza, long after that, into other territories and other geographies. And of course, it's not like it's not happening here on some level, or the preparations for it are not happening here on some level, economically, politically, etc. But there is that goal, and I think that Israel, when it woke up to 7th of October, the idea of having actual concrete plans around the destruction of Gaza was not just brought up on 7th of October. Like, and this is what I think people should understand quite clearly. Probably history books will, once some archives are opened or whatever happens in the future, will of course attest to that there were actual plans around the type of destruction and war that Israel has been committing in the Gaza Strip. This was not, planning on the fly. There was actual plans for how Israel would commit a mass, total form of warfare against a place like Gaza. So there is elements of pre-deliberative planning going on within Israeli military, and we could have seen signs of it, whether it's the introduction of AI technologies, whether it's turning Israeli army into an efficient inhalation machine, as its ex-leader Aviv Kochavi proclaimed, as part of his redesign of the Israeli military. So there's a lot of elements of that I think we'll discover were not just a response; they were already there. And in fact, one of the points that I always repeat, that in many ways 7th of October was kind of a, if you want, a preemptive strike, because reading where history was going, I think the resistance realized, not only because of normalization or what's happening here and there, that realized that the only way forward for the Israeli state at this particular moment in its history is to attempt the ethnic cleansing of Palestine from Palestinians, specifically in the West Bank and, of course, in Gaza as well. So I think these are the terms through which we can also view it, that there were actual concrete planning being done, and Israel basically woke up, took out these plans, and started operating within their full view. Now, of course, things changed. Perhaps some of the plans, changed gears. Some things Israel didn't anticipate; it had to adjust to. But I think that the idea that of destroying Gaza was not born on the 7th of October. It was not born as a response. It was already there. That's one element of it. The second element, in terms of destroying the built environment, um, we could speak of it on a psychic level. But if we think about it, I mean, if you want to basically eventually, if you're incapable now because of Egypt and problems around the borders of destroying, of opening the borders in a way and force the population out through the borders, the only other way to actually get people in the long or the medium run to leave Gaza in their hundreds of thousands is to render their material well-being null, to destroy homes in a way that is irreversible, and at the same time to clear specific areas so you can redesign Gaza spatially, and of course introduce settlements later on, and at the same time make sure that there's nothing there to remain with. Like, if you're rendering a population without its infrastructure and built environment and community and sense of being in a place that it knew, at least in terms of roads, and you completely change its entire framework, then it's much easier to conceive of, you know, leaving Gaza, because it's not the same Gaza you lived in. It's not the same Gaza that you knew. It's not the same homes or neighborhoods or life that existed before October 7th. So there's an element also of that going on, an element which the destruction helps build security zones, for instance. If you're going to withdraw eventually, or you take that choice, it could help introduce certain settlements, but at the same time, it could also induce, to the extent possible, people leaving the Gaza Strip. So there's an element of how the rendering of homes into rubble is meant as a way to incentivize the process of ethnic cleansing, specifically what Israelis term, people like Ben-Gvir, not forced migration, but we should encourage people on their own will to leave. That's the first element of what happens here. Second element, there is a revenge aspect. Destroying Palestinian homes, of course, there's a revenge aspect, because it's even, already, it's already part of Israeli doctrine, for instance, to destroy the homes of Palestinians who commit a resistance act, for instance, in the West Bank, his family home. Like, there's, the idea of destroying the home as part of a price to be paid, not necessarily as something of a spatial redesign, nor as something that Israelis do out of only of a deliberative plan of ethnic cleansing, but only as a form of punishment, is already part and parcel of Israel's, if you want, colonial tactics in the West Bank, but also in the Gaza Strip more broadly. So there's nothing specifically new or novel about this policy as well, policy of destroying homes. The idea in Israel, of course, is like, if we destroy the home, then we increase deterrence. How do you increase deterrence? Because if a Palestinian is thinking of, committing a resistance act, I don't know, engaging in going into militancy or engaging in some sort of operation, that they will think twice, because not only will they will be killed or arrested, also their homes will be destroyed, his family house will be ruined, so he will leave his family without a house. That increase of the price means that you create this equation where the Palestinian, before embarking on such an operation, will think about all the costs associated with such an operation. Therefore, he will not commit this act. This is the logic of it, no? But of course, within that logic of deterrence, there's the logic of punishment as well, and revenge. And whenever one of these tactics doesn't work, the Israelis start flirting with other tactics, like, we destroyed the homes, but still we have a lot of people doing operations. What should we do? Then we're arresting the mother and arresting the father and humiliating the family, and committing all these different attacks, not only against the person who committed, between quotes, the crime in the eyes of the colonial system, but also all those people he associates with, specifically intimately. So here there's a lot of readings how, for instance, Palestinians, because they're from a specific cultural orientation, they would look at the humiliation of their mother as also a deterrent. They would see that the humiliation of their father as a deterrent, because they would be permitting the Israeli occupation forces to commit heinous torture and humiliation against their family, then they will not commit any attacks in the future. So this logic of deterrence and punishment, they coexist together. Having said that, I don't think in Gaza there's only these logics going on. And I think the drive here among at least Israel's right wing is an actual goal oriented project. The project is uh, Palestinians in Gaza out, Israelis control the Gaza Strip and build settlements in the Gaza Strip. So pure logic of, ethnic cleansing and replacement. That is the project. Nothing, it's very goal oriented. We could speak, for instance, among perhaps some parts of Israeli society that also see this as perhaps unrealistic. Maybe we cannot achieve it. We're not sure if actually the world will go along with us on this. When by the world I mean the U.S., Canada, the UK, Germany, etc. How much we'll lose in terms of diplomatic cover, in terms of friendships and allies, how much backlash we will get. Some within the military have resisted, not out of any ethical or moral commitment against, for instance, ethnic cleansing, because that's the roots of the state itself, but out of its practicability, how realistic it is. So they don't think this is realistic because they understand the extent of time they need and the extent of killing they will have to do and the extent of convincing they will have to convince the world with. So these are the three elements that are kind of like, are obstacles in Israel's way, if you want. The extent of killing, because first of all, there's many Palestinians within the Gaza Strip that rather die in the Strip than leave. Not everybody, but a good chunk of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip rather die than leave. The second element is that there's an active still going on resistance in the Gaza Strip that is also costing the Israeli military in terms of its personnel, injuries, etc. We're seeing the effects of that even on Israeli soldiers after they leave service in terms of increasing suicide rates among their soldiers. I don't want to exaggerate the impact of resistance, but there's an active resistance that will also cost the Israelis. The third thing is that as you are moving into Gaza and bulldozing Gaza, bulldozing takes time. It's not a fast process. Bulldozing takes time, clearing rubble takes time, changing, this all takes time. At the same time, the population is still within the Gaza Strip while you're committing a lot of these different spatial changes in built environments. So you need a lot of time to do that. You need more time, and therefore, a lot of what Israel is trying to do is to defer, to allow more industrial efficient means through which it can change entire landmarks within the Gaza Strip. Already, it has succeeded around, the Rafah area, large parts of North Gaza area. It basically rendering the entire areas into rubble and clearing them out as it moves now into Khan Yunis and other areas. But also, still, the built environment in Gaza is huge, and much of it is destroyed. But much of it is also destroyed in this kind of, damaged way, not completely. It still needs a lot of, to completely turn Gaza into rubble. That takes a lot of time, at least in terms of, how you'll go about it. So there's that element of it. And at the same time, you're also waiting for a Palestinian moment of collapse. So this is also what you're waiting for. This is part of like the problem that, or the bind that Israel finds itself. On the one hand, it has these peace agreements with its neighbors like Egypt, that if it wants to embark on an ethnic cleansing campaign, it will have to at least risk some level of damage to these relationships. Egypt just signed some $30 billion gas deal with Israel, I think, 2 days ago. So there's re-entrenchment of these kind of economic interests between the Arab comprador class and some of these states and the Israeli state itself. Jordan, similar type of relationship. Also, new incomers like the United Arab Emirates, a country that has not even stopped, any flights coming from Dubai into Tel Aviv airport, even at the height of, except for the height, I think, of the Iranian ballistic barrages against Israel. But other than that, it has maintained, it's close cooperation, but also the air flights going into Israel when a lot of other international air flights stopped servicing the Israeli airport. So you have also these countries that are waiting at least at some level for this to end because they want to re-entrench, they want to increase investments, they want to increase cooperation economically. And I'm not saying the Gaza genocide is stopping that at any level, but it's at least putting some hurdles in front of many of these Arab elites in going full on in the embrace of Israel, the way they would want to fully embrace Israel, at least publicly and openly. So it cannot really ethnically cleanse because it has these relationships. The second element, that it could commit entire killing of the population, but also that takes time, specifically if you don't want to indicate that you're doing that, meaning that you want to do it on a rate that does not make anybody suspicious that what you're doing is basically 100 a day until you finish the 2 million that exist in the Gaza Strip, that this is just part of a temporal there's some level of temporal closure. And yes, you're committing massacres, but these massacres have some sort of end. So your intention is not, the literal killing of every single person in the Gaza Strip. And at the same time, you don't want any solution. And this is what we see in Israeli rhetoric. No, if the PA cannot come back in, we don't want the Egyptians really either. Maybe some Arab force, but we don't know which Arab force. So you keep things so vague that it tells you what Israel is doing, at least in terms of its management of this war, is to simply say to itself, I want to extend the time in which I can kill, I can engage in destruction, I can change, the physical makeup of the Gaza Strip. And at the same time, perhaps eventually I can also see if I'm able to either induce a collapse in the population in a way that is irreversible, or harm the population either biologically by malnutrition in a way that is irreversible, or the third option is change the demographic makeup and the spatial position of most of the Palestinians in Gaza in a way that would allow me or permit me to ethnically cleanse them easily, by perhaps eventually giving them this kind of exit ticket out of the Gaza Strip for those who are willing to take it. So this is the I think the major, let's say, logic that is operating now. It's extend time, defer. At the same time, as you attack, when the Israelis are speaking of attacking and conquering, they're talking about, again, demographic change. So Gaza City, north, moving the population downward south, and of course engaging in brutal destruction of the Gaza City itself. So nobody will ever return to the Gaza City. You will prevent that from happening. And of course, engaging the resistance there and killing anybody who remains, which means also 200, 300,000 people that might remain, maybe 100. So, killing another 100,000 or 200,000 people as you try to commit or finish the job, as Ben-Gvir and Smotrich would claim. Now, this is also, again, this is hard to do. It's not easy. There's some hubris in it in many ways, because Israel, one of the things that it's also caught in, it needs the cooperation of other states to get a lot of the different things or results that it wants, including, the idea of moving the population outside of the Gaza Strip, so ethnic cleansing. So there's some on some level, Israel is stuck, and within that time, what are we gonna do? Okay, we're in Gaza. What are we gonna do? Let's destroy the homes. I'm not saying it's only that, like, this is the logic, but that's part of like what's happening. What are we gonna do now in terms of, if we are incapable of inducing this mass exodus from Gaza through the Egyptian border, for instance, then okay, we're in the Gaza Strip. We need to at least be moving and doing something. We need to have some sort of objective for the military to actually be committed to. And yeah, one of our objectives is the destruction of the built environment. Worst case scenario, even if the Palestinians in Gaza remain, what happens is that they will need decades to just build their own homes. They will be economically more poor. they will be more dependent, that any form of resistance in the future is simply inconceivable. So like this is the worst case scenario. Best case scenario, because we've destroyed that much of the Gaza Strip, we can now, convince many Palestinians to leave and perhaps empty it demographically in a significant way and introduce settlements. Maybe a small portion of the Gazans will remain, but we can manage those like we manage Palestinians as elsewhere. So these are the scenarios that it play. But eventually, what Israel does is, as much as I temporarily extend the war, as much as I can garner some sort of accumulation of tactical successes, destruction of homes, and we'll see where this will lead eventually in terms of transferring this into concrete, narrative of victory as Israel would like to transfer it. Now, why I say there's some hubris in it, because there is overextension here. There's an excess as well. There's also repercussions in terms of, we can depict Israel as like, Tom and Jerry going off a cliff, but still doesn't know that he's off a cliff until he looks down. No, like there's an element of that going on in Israel that it doesn't understand the extent to which also it has dug a hole morally and politically, and I think in the future around how many people in the world feel around it. And I know that I'm not here betting on electoral politics changing things, but that very idea, that emotional investment, that irreversible sense of being disgusted by Israel and its behavior and seeing how much of a problem it is, that will haunt politics, culture, as we move forward in many ways. I cannot predict how it will move. I'm not saying that will liberate Palestine, but what I'm saying is that there will be problems facing the state in the future and currently that it has not, been used to, specifically as, the entire narrative, ideological and political narrative that it has built has basically been dismantled in the eyes of much of the world. And as much as Israel remains dependent on the world for its survival, that will be a problem for itself. It will be a problem. Of course, there are elements that are positive from a very narrow isolationist Zionist point of view. What I mean by that is that not isolationist in the sense of them being isolationist towards the world, but the idea that, yeah, the world hates us. And part of Israel is to say that the world hates the Jew, and therefore you should come to Israel. This is at least part of and part and parcel of how Israel was able to also, if you want, attract the world Jewry to its project in the past, along with its militarism and its ability to defeat Arab armies and much of its display in the early years of military power eventually. But there's a cost to be paid, at least in on the level of a state that is highly dependent on the world, but at the same time incapable of fully being autonomous in its power, and at the same time having this complete collapse in its narrative, or near total collapse of its narrative, its moral grounding across the globe, and of course its ability to arouse investment. Now, I mean, this is one of the issues as well. It's not that only people, have seen the truth, and that there's a lot of committed people who are willing to work very hard in terms of not only spreading messages but also maintaining the spirit of this cause across the time. And I think that is one area that we can look forward to, at least in terms of how Israel will reckon with this fact eventually. But my contention here, instead of this kind of rational or irrational sense to it, and maybe there's a form of stuckness here, incapable of making choices and decisions that are decisive, because there's this kind of highly seductive lure for Zionism, which is ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip and totally and completely replacing its population by a settler population. That is luring much of Zionism into this form of stuckness. And at the same time, the pragmatic, rational, perhaps, point of view, which would say enough is enough. We've garnered a lot of successes in Lebanon across our fight with the axis of resistance. We've destroyed the Gaza Strip. We've created enough destruction and massacres and pain and loss for the Palestinians for them to lick their wounds for a long time to come. And at this point, we can just go for an agreement that would see the Israeli captives come back, and at the same time, find some sort of arrangement in the Gaza Strip that suits also Israeli security interests. And let's live to fight another day. And I think for now, that seduction of maybe perhaps if we just push more, we can get either the Palestinians in Gaza to collapse totally, morally, politically, socially, economically, even biologically, in terms of the accumulation of the effects of hunger, or we could keep the genocide going until the solution becomes the only thing is like, yeah, we are irrational, we are murderous thugs. The only way to solve this issue is to let the Gazans out, because the only thing we'll continue doing is to continue killing. So come here, world, and take them out so we don't have to kill more of them. That's the other way we can look at this, on how just keeping the motion of killing going on, keeping the Gaza population hostage to this killing machine, will eventually just induce any means to stop this war, including, for instance, that there's some sort of acceptance of Israel proposal by the world, or let's take the Gazans off Israel's hand. That's the other way through which Israel can get some sort of concessions from the world on these terms. Yes, you wanna sanction us? Okay, you're sanctioning us. We're gonna even kill them more. Like, that is also part of the Israeli, at least, logic that we could see unfold in the coming weeks or months ahead. Having said that, I saw and I think there's an element of military resistance within Israel to this ongoing campaign in the Gaza Strip, because it's quite unclear to them what the military could achieve within this domain, and because the military is also paying a price in terms of soldiers remaining long months in the war, injuries, psychological impairment, deaths, loss of vehicles, and there's also much, at least in terms of the current Palestinian resistance and ability to inflict pain, that is also causing Israelis much headache as well. And at the same time, it's not clear how just remaining within this pulsion of killing will actually find an end game that is clear enough, at least from the perspective of the Israeli army as it moves forward to conquer Gaza. Because what is asked from it is not only to enter Gaza, but also to remain in Gaza for years to come. So that means that it will have to conquer Gaza, ethnic cleanse, or I don't know, kill everybody that remains within Gaza and doesn't, evacuate or clear or leave the city as the Israelis want, and at the same time also engage the resistance there for months and years to come. And the world is changing fast as these things are occurring and unfolding. As you kill more, as you challenge the world to react, as you take away Anas al-Sharif, as you engage in these forms of killings, there are consequences. Now, whether the consequences are enough for you to change course is a different story altogether, but there are many consequences at least coming Israel's way.